You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is November 13th, 2024, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we're bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And today we have a special guest with us. We have Dr. Norman Horn, who is the founder and president of the Libertarian Christian Institute. So we'll be talking with him about what his organization about and those values within the liberty movement. And we also want to touch too on some of the things that have happened recently with the election, because this is our first show back since the election. So we'll definitely touch on some of those things. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our upper right-hand corner, we have our guest today, Dr. Norman Horn, and we're going to find out a bunch about him as the show goes on. But what we always do first is we start out with our Liberty quote of the day. And this time we have two quotes because these ones kind of relate to, I guess, this question that comes up a lot, and it'll certainly be important in this episode. But what really was the founders' intent about the separation of church and state? And so here we have a quote from John Quincy Adams. He was the sixth president of the United States, and he says, "Our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." So that's kind of an interesting quote in its own, but we also too have this quote from Jefferson as well. And Jefferson said, and this is a little bit truncated that I had to pull out here, but religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his worship or his faith or his worship. I contemplate with sovereign reference that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. So clearly he had some concerns here, and I'm not sure if those concerns are necessarily obvious. I mean, a lot of people might just cite this as a wholesale wall between church and state, but I think maybe some of this is, he also had a fear that, that government might take over religion too, and might use it to force itself on other people. But anyways, I thought these were two interesting quotes. What do you guys think of these quotes? Because to me, I think this is a topic that comes up a lot, and it's definitely something that's kind of worth grappling with. What should be the limitations of religion and within government. So do you guys have any thoughts?
Norman, you can go.
Oh, okay. Well, sure. Well, first off, thank you, Jason, for the invitation to join you guys here. It's really an honor to be on the Knuckleheads podcast and to be counted among the Knuckleheads, at least for one evening. But with regards to, these quotes, I think it's simultaneously in modern American life kind of made both a less of the matter, it's not considered important enough, and it's often made too important. And what I mean by that is that on the one hand, you have folks who think that this wall of separation means that never the twain shall meet, that there is not one way in which that religious life should ever have any influence whatsoever on voting or whatever with regards to public policy and public life. That is false. And it is absolutely something that the founders did not intend. On the other hand, there are those who think that it's, clearly, not quite that the founders were kind of mistaken, or they didn't really mean it that way, and they try to elevate the status of the church in such a way that is just not appropriate for the church today. And because I think that realistically, what the founders were trying to do was understandably say, look, the natural law that is in the background that we have built this all upon is such that we don't need to have a state established church, an official church, in order to make this law happen. We know that this is real. We don't need to justify it through the authority of the church off the bat. But it does appeal to the fact that, well, look, we look around us, and the natural law had to come from somewhere, and whatever that looks like to you, we're saying this exists. And so, this comes from their experience. The founders and the colonists experienced the encroachment upon the church from the Church of England and or the churches in America were encroached upon by the Church of England and the government of England in such a way to control them. And so they made it impossible. They wanted to make it impossible, at least for that to recur, and throughout the federal government, because even beyond what the government of England did, there were instances of churches in the colonies themselves that would basically try to enact public policy in various ways, and it was bad. It was bad for them. Their experience, if we want to call it, if we want to use some buzzwords, their lived experience was such that was what motivated them to do that. And so I think that's something we should remember, is that this is not contextless in history. If you have to really understand the history in order to understand what this meant. And I don't think people appreciate that as much anymore. Instead, we get indoctrinated by buzz phrases and clickbait, as opposed to a nuanced and proper understanding of our founders and of our history and where we come from.
But do you think, Norman, do you think there's a line between church and state?
Well, sure. I mean, look, the First Amendment of the Constitution, is guaranteeing that the Congress shall make no law about the establishment of religion. So there will not be an official federal government state church in this regard. That is the line. And so, and then the interpretation of that by the Supreme Court over time has kind of helped to elaborate upon what is proper and what is not. But I think that's where we have to stop with the federal government. And then that has some downstream effects upon the way the states work as well. But yeah, that's what it's all about. I don't see any reason why we should try to establish a church. In fact, I would reckon that the founders in part realized that not only is this important for protecting human liberty on the one hand, it's also important for protecting the church. Broadly speaking, they didn't want the church to kind of fall into the trap even of trying to take power via the governments of their day. And so that's because that's for us, that should be considered a sin. We should not be lording it over our fellow men and women around us, through the force of law like that. We have a different mandate from God.
But clearly we know that, of course, the government cannot, under our current constitutional framework, the government cannot tell us, well, okay, here's Sunday, you should stop what you're doing and you should go to church and pray to the Christian God or the whoever God, that kind of stuff. We know that is clearly forbidden. What about things like vouchers and that sort of things? Is there a line there that, for instance, if the government decides to give out vouchers, they cannot give that to the schools of any faith, say like Catholic schools or even Islamic schools, whatever? Is there a prohibition there, you think?
Considering, the voucher question is one of kind of a downstream effect. Since I'm fundamentally against government schools to begin with, it's kind of well, that's sort of as long as we're admitting from the outset that we're already kind of aberrant from the Constitution in this regard. Well, okay, well let's try to kind of nuance from there. And I don't think that there should be a restriction. That is a placement of a restriction upon families for the choices that they get to make with the tax dollars that they earned and are able to and should be able to use, because they were stolen from to begin with. So I don't think that the government has it's not probably the right usage of the word legally, but I don't think they really have standing to tell people what they can and can't use the vouchers on. But that's perhaps another discussion. Again, I'm against government schools to begin with.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, if I could say anything about the quote from John Quincy Adams about the Constitution, it specifically says the Constitution was meant for a moral and religious people. Since the Constitution is the law of the land that restricts with certain powers and disabilities the government under which it is imposed, then I think, since usually the people involved in government are devoid of morality and religiosity, I think then that it must matter to the people that are to hold the government employees or government people their feet to the fire of the law of the land, and they're the ones that have to be moral and religious enough to go, go the distance to to make them follow the Constitution, as we have seen, because certainly the Constitution was not meant for them if it was meant for the moral. It was not meant for the government people involved, the politicians and the government servants, so to speak.
Well, and clearly, it can't be interpreted as being that John Quincy Adams and Thomas Jefferson were only speaking of, like, effectively the evangelical Christians context of our day or something to that. I mean, John Adams, and I think John Quincy Adams as well, they were Unitarians. That's not exactly what you'd consider an evangelical Christian of today. And of course, Thomas Jefferson was a deist. He believed in God, but he also didn't believe, like, say a Puritan or a Presbyterian of his day or a Baptist or whatever. I mean, they're not exactly what we would consider to be like of a, I come from kind of the theologically conservative Christian background. All right. You know what? They were definitely not that. Now, they were certainly conservative morally and whatnot, but they didn't hold to the same values that I do in that respect. That's okay. We can still live together. I mean, and live in peace. But that it's not, we can't overdo it either.
Yeah. It does seem like this is a very fine and contrived line to be able to say that there can't, that somehow we can't consider religion and government with some of these people, because so many of our laws necessarily are going to spring from these moral fabrics. I mean, just the whole debate over abortion can't help but touch on religious issues. So I just can't, it just seems so contrived to think that we can't have these discussions about religion with, I mean, I could certainly see the reticence of not wanting to have people come in and use authoritarian power to force their religious views on everybody. But on the other hand, how can we not have the discussions either? It just, it does bring up the fact too, that with, taxes weren't really that big of a thing when our government was first founded. And of course, now there's this tax exempt status that they can kind of use to make the churches shut up around, the election times, it seems like.
Well, only to a certain extent. I mean, and they'll come after you, and you do need to be careful whether you're a church or any other 501c3 in that respect. But you do have certain things you can do. It is not as if you can't say a thing, and that's actually one of the problems that we even have in the modern church today, is that sometimes people interpret or they believe that what their 501c3 status means for them is they should not speak at all, or something like that, that they're somehow handcuffed towards saying anything at all. And the fact is that is not the case. What it means is that you're not to tell people how to vote, and you're not to give endorsements. But you know what you can do? Call people on the carpet and say that the powers that be in our day and age are evil, and they are practicing evil, and they are full of evil, and so on and so forth. Like, there's nothing, they can't tell you no on that one. And if they did, First Amendment comes into play. Because then they're kind of doing an anti-establishment clause at that point. So they can't actually muffle you entirely. And so you have a voice, use it, and you can use it from the pulpit for that matter. And so it is okay to do that. And because we have there's so many good things you can say about the political world, from the pulpit, as a Christian right now. And we shouldn't shy away from doing that, because otherwise you are missing out on an opportunity to influence. That is what's supposed to happen.
Well, let's jump into your organization now and find out a little bit about what I guess Christians within the Liberty Movement are using their voice for. So, James, can you bring up the website here? So, this is the Libertarian Christian Institute's webpage. So, it is libertarianchristians.com. So, you can come here and find out more information about it. And under the About, you can actually find quite a bit about what the mission is and some of the core values that they're that they're discussing. So did you want to tell us a little bit about why you guys formed this? I mean, what's the connection
What's our
for
history?
libertarians? There you go.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes back a little ways. As usual, it usually starts with Ron Paul. I mean, that's well, that's not entirely the case, but way back in 2008, after the first Ron Paul campaign and in the wake of the Obama election, I started this little website called libertarianchristians.com because I had been writing a whole lot over the course of years leading up to this website about the intersections of libertarian ideas and Christian theology. And in my mind, what I had observed was that there really were quite a number of Christians in the liberty movement. But unfortunately, what we were seeing is that they weren't they weren't really the loudest voices in the room. Unfortunately, that was often the Randians, and because they do tend to just be loud. And Ayn Rand isn't horrible. I recommend people that read her at times. But the objectivists sometimes get a little bit too much press, and so there has this kind of been there was an unfortunate kind of marrying of, oh, if you're a libertarian, you couldn't possibly be a Christian because you follow Ayn Rand. And then, unfortunately, some of our fellow Christians who are libertarians in the liberty movement just didn't feel super confident in explaining their Christian viewpoints in the context of libertarian ideas. And so that was what the whole project was really on. It's like, let's bring those back to prominence in a different way, because we certainly have the intellectual firepower. There's all sorts of Christians out there in various liberty organizations, whether we're talking about, the founder of the Independent Institute, the late, great David Thoreau, or various people at the Mises Institute, or the Cato Institute, or Reason, or Acton Institute, which is an explicitly Christian organization, and so on and so forth. They're everywhere. And it's just that they're not always made that prominent. So let's do that. Let's bring that up. Let's train people up to go and defend a free society from a Christian point of view, the way it was intended to be. And so that's really what it's all about. The mission of Libertarian Christian Institute, which was, built on the top of libertarianchristians.com. We incorporated as a 501c3 in 2015. The mission was to equip the church to promote a free society. And because we envision a world where Christians, instead of being polarized by left and right, realize that libertarian ideas or libertarianism is the most consistent expression of Christian political thought. And what we've done in this resource page here on our About page is kind of give like a series of core values that we feel that like really anybody can in the Christian faith can really understand and agree upon. And certainly all libertarian Christians can, whether or not that they come from a different denomination or whatnot. Like there's a lot of ecumenical kind of backdrop to what we do. We're not associated with any denomination. We in fact have multiple denominations amongst our staff. And then, so what do that is who we are. So we affirm these types of classical liberal values, what we call libertarianism, and do that in such a way that helps people to defend a free society. That's what we do. And how do we do it? We just create the best content we can. So we are fundamentally just a content creating machine. We have 7 active podcasts, ranging from deep theological discussions to more like news and events, current events, different points of view, and also even in the intersection of faith and work and the beauty of the free market in action. And so that's what we're all about. And we just create a ton of material, try to disseminate that as best we can. We do podcasts, we write books, we do all sorts of great stuff for you, and it's all under the beautiful intersection of Christianity and liberty. That's what we're all about.
So could you just give us an example of the intersection of libertarian values and Christian theology?
Sure. I think a great one is actually the non-aggression principle. Simply put, the non-aggression principle says that we are not to initiate force against others. That is unjustified. And so that we would actually call that in some respect like the other side of the coin of the golden rule. Some people call it the silver rule or something like that at times. But the golden rule says that to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That was what Jesus implored us to do. Yes. And that's a positive statement. That's telling you something you should do. The non-aggression principle is kind of the other side. It's the negative part of that. This is what you are not to do. And so that's there's a connection there. And I think that, that is really important to kind of understand. I think it's very simply put, like, if God created us with free will, in order to choose what is right, choose to do right or to do wrong, whether we are to sin or to do what is right, then we need to honor the freedom of others. And that if we're not doing that, then we are not, like, we're doing less than what God intended for himself to do, which is he honors our freedom to choose. And so, like, we should be doing that too for each other. And here's another intersection. I think that's a very underappreciated point that libertarians should probably try to like re-emphasize, is that all humans are under the same standard of morality. The Bible says that we are all. I mean, this is the meaning, by the way, of all men are created equal. It's like we are all equal under the moral law. We are all equally responsible to do what is right under the moral law. And so, to that effect, what that means is that it does not matter what your position is. There is no privilege of position in accordance with Christianity. It doesn't matter, for instance, if you're an elder in a church or a preacher or a pastor. We're all under the same moral law. You don't get a special privilege of position to do something that is wrong, that's for some to be and call it right, that somebody else would not be able to do. Similarly, whether you wear a position, whether you're in a position of power, whether you're a president, a police officer, a military man, or woman, whatever, congressman, mayor, dog catcher, I don't care. We're all under the same moral law. You don't get a special privilege of position to do what is wrong. And so that's something else, again, is convergent with, the libertarian ideas in Christian morality and ethics.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
Did your organization write any articles on the invasion of Ukraine
yes, I mean,
one way or another?
We are 100% anti-war.
Okay.
And while we would note that it was immoral for Russia to invade Ukraine and initiate force against them, we are a non-interventionist, and in the tradition of kind of the Ron Paul foreign policy, even if you want to call it that, and that to where we don't believe that we should be meddling in the affairs outside of our borders like that. And so we're against war consistently, both to call people on the carpet for initiating them and also to encourage the United States to not participate them locally.
So let me just ask a question here. Go back in history just a little bit. I think there are many instances where the Bible and some of our own Christian teachings, which I grew up in myself,
mm-hmm.
were used to justify slavery. How do we reconcile that when slavery is, of course, all over the Bible?
So there's a variety of ways we can discuss this. First off, one of the first major story arc of the Old Testament of Torah is the book of Exodus, which is to lead people out of slavery.
Yes.
God's chosen people, the Israelites, of course, and that's the arc that we are implored to follow as well. That is also, of course, you could suggest that is also a metaphorical way of describing even our own exit out of sin. That this is that we are led out of Egypt, a state of sin, to follow in the way of Christ. So you can kind of see that sort of pathway revealing itself early. But as it pertains to just flat out slavery, it is technically prohibited, even in the Old Testament. And we actually have a whole article on this called Slavery in the Old Testament, which suggests that while we need to understand, of course, that there were multiple senses in which slaves were described, even in the Old Testament. You had kind of you could sell oneself into kind of a bond servant, which was still called a slave, and so on and so forth. Like there were some nuances there as well. But
I imagine today Bernie would call a guy working at McDonald's a slave.
Yeah.
So there you go. So I imagine there's a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah, perhaps that could be analogous. I don't necessarily want to call that right off the bat. I'm gonna have to think about it. But as it pertains to the Old Testament, it was absolutely prohibited in the Israelite code, the law, to force or press someone into slavery. And it says specifically why. The Lord redeemed you out of Egypt. And the presumption right there is like, how dare you try to put somebody else into the same position that you your people were in Egypt. So that's the way of things. So of course, in antiquity, there were all sorts of other nations that were practicing slavery. People were able to. It was in fact legal to purchase in the Old Testament law, like from outside of Israel, maybe a slave, and bring them in. But here was the funny thing: if that slave ever decided they wanted to become incorporated as an Israelite, they had to be immediately freed. So if you were a slave, you actually wanted to be like bought and put into Israel. It would have been more beneficial for you because you were supposed to be treated well. And if you ever converted, basically, you were going to be free anyway. And to top it all off, it didn't matter who you were. There was a thing called the Year of Jubilee where all slaves were supposed to be released no matter who they were, period. So it was like there were multiple ways in which the Old Testament and the Old Testament law actually provided for a way out of slavery. And why? Because the Lord redeemed them out of Egypt. You would expect that to happen. And then, of course, throughout that doesn't mean, okay, I should point out, that doesn't mean that the Israelites followed it perfectly. Of course, they were sinners too. And there were instances in which Israelites did press each other into slavery. That's a reality. Like that happened, in the same way that Christians have in the past too. But the arc of the Old Testament and the arc of the New Testament is one where liberty is supposed to be presumed. Now, yes, there were obvious instances in the New Testament even of people who were Christians who were slaves. Go read the book of Philemon and go check it out. There's some interesting stuff in there. And it's the injunction of Paul at one point is to look, if Philemon wants to remain in your household, let him, but you better treat him well. And if he wants to be freed, you should let him free. So they're like all throughout the Bible, there's actually this kind of arc toward freedom. And so, it is patently ridiculous that Christians would try to justify. I mean, certainly people justify all sorts of things using all sorts of things. And it would be no surprise that somebody would try to use the Bible to justify some type of immoral activity. They do it all the time. If you think about yourself, you've probably done it too. You don't need to tell me, this isn't a confessional here, but I'll tell you what, I've done it. So like, are we surprised that people do it? No, but it isn't what is meant to be.
And I have to break in real quick here to just say, if you're watching on public access, you're going to have to catch the rest of this confessional on the other side online. All the juicy things that are going to get talked about behind the veil.
Oh boy. So I'm not sure I signed up for that. Hold on.
But
contract.
But anyways, definitely, if you're watching, check that out. We got a lot more to talk about. So one of the things that definitely jumps out to me, and I'm not, certainly I was raised with a lot of Christian values, but I'm not. I guess I'm not a staunch, rigid Christian, who goes to church every week or anything like that. But it does seem to me that that for a lot of people, maybe there might be appear to be some conflict. I mean, certainly the overarching message of Christianity is you have free will to make a choice, and that's the whole point of it. So therefore, you're that certainly seems like a liberty value. But on the other hand, you look at some of the Old Testament things, and it very much seems like edicts that thou shalt not do this type of thing. And some of those kind of seem a little authoritarian. So I guess, where do you sort of resolve those sort of conflicting things about, liberty versus authoritarian in religion?
Well, before Norman answer and fine, but when the government tells you don't commit murder, I mean, that is thou shalt not kill, right? So and I don't think we could call that authoritarian, but Norman, you can answer though.
Well, I think government is authoritarian.
Well, sure it is, but the point is though the law will have to be judged in sense of its moral outcome. And thou shalt not kill, to me, although thou shalt not commit murder, I would say is probably the correct interpretation. Is the moral outcome of that, to me, is a good outcome. So I don't in terms of where you draw the line, that's a slightly different question. But please, Norman, go ahead, please.
Sure. Well, I think it should be kind of obvious though that, there's a difference between the various types of laws in the Old Testament that were given to the Israelites. There are certain things that we see as blatantly applicable to all men at all time, period. Thou shalt not murder being one of them. Ironically enough, we always go to that, but sometimes we should maybe go to the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, and maybe start there, because that's the root of a lot of different types of
Yes.
of evil, if you will. Covetousness is in fact, you could say that is the root of almost all of this. That wanting to be like God, being the issue of the first sin, if we go to Genesis chapter 3, even. But there are other laws that that are considered to be civil law, and so that was like the way in which the Israelite society was governing themselves, and it was a means of them setting stuff up. And then there was ceremonial law. Now, clearly, we don't have an injunction upon the church today to follow all the ceremonial law. And in fact, I think a good example. Let's get real down and dirty for a second. Is should it be a requirement to circumcise your baby boys or something? I don't think so. I don't think that should be a requirement.
Yes.
And in fact, that was argued about in the book of Acts, in the early church, in the New Testament. And we have that whole recording record in the book of Acts about that sort of ceremonial law. So clearly there was some appropriateness historically for the certain laws that were for the Israelites in their time and place. And then there were some of those civil laws that we may be able to draw some inspiration from. There's some really interesting things about how we should be treating strangers among us, or immigrants / travelers, people among us, as well as an understanding of borders and property rights and whatnot. So while we might understand some of that civil law as being like, we should try to understand how we might apply this here, that is the way it is administered is different. And then there's a moral law that is over all of it. And that is where, we say things like, thou shalt not murder, honor your father and mother, and so on and so forth. Like these are things that's part of the moral law that you're supposed to follow. And so there's just different ways of thinking about that. There's a lot of theology that's been written about, and we could talk about that for hours. There's entire courses at universities that are offered in such things. Suffice to say, that's kind of like the high level. That's how we differentiate it. Is it the ceremonial law is stuff that we don't really feel that's part of the Jewish religion of that point in time. A lot of that is fulfilled in Christ, and we have a different way of worshiping, if you will. Now, some of the civil law we take inspiration from, we understand, we learn from it, but we don't necessarily administer it the same way. And the moral law, universal, period.
Well, Norman, one of the things I wanted to jump in here too, because, we clearly have seen that the way government has been going, there's been certainly infringement upon lots of liberties for different people, but certainly, but certainly during the COVID era, we saw it sort of hitting Christians or religious groups harder. And so, James, maybe you could bring up the visual here. So I had sort of a series of links here that I just wanted to run through just to refresh people on some of the things that were happening. But like here was a case in New York where a pastor was threatened with $1,000 fine for holding drive-in church services. So, this is like, certainly 6 feet of separation. Obviously, people are in their own cars. And, and it's funny, too, because we even saw drive-ins hosting things like, I remember Garth Brooks concerts and other things like that, where they would be streamed up. But the point is that it did seem like this was treated differently than other things. Like here was a specific case where they were telling people, hey, we don't want you out there getting out there doing anything, but if you're going to protest for George Floyd, then it's okay.
Then it's okay. As long as you're wearing a mask outside. Come on, guys. Like, oh geez.
Yeah, but I mean, this was kind of the crazy stuff, and of course, then you had all these sort of scientific experts coming around saying that yes, it's just fine to do this, but and even it was funny. We even had the case of the Chicago mayor who was running around, and there was a picture of her, and she was not only was she, I believe she was out there for some of the George Floyd stuff, but I mean, after Biden got elected, and they wanted everybody masked still, then, and she's out there without a mask in the middle of the crowd. That's Lori Lightfoot. But I guess it does go back to the point. Well, I mean, religious people were treated differently, and it seemed like there wasn't a lot of pushback at first, although it sounds like the Supreme Court eventually did come in and say, hey, look, you can't do this stuff. But how did that impact your movement? Because you guys obviously must have been feeling this point blank during all this.
Yeah, I mean, it was a weird time. We were, coming down, like it was a challenging time in a lot of ways, right? We had I'm actually in like the infection prevention industry, even as a chemical engineer these days. So I was very, like, I had a lot of the bad stuff, that did the real bad stuff at COVID. It like was at the forefront of my business and what I do on a regular basis during that time. So it was really weird. Um, but very clearly the way that the government reacted to all of this was insane. And we see that more than ever now. And in many respects, I think this was a moment that should kind of cause the church to take pause, because on the one hand, we didn't stand up oftentimes as well as we should have for what was right, which was to not forsake the meeting together, as the Bible tells us to something we should not do. We should not forsake the meeting of saints together. Neither should we, capitulate to the way that the state defines various people away from being able to do what they need to do to survive, and which is to work, to produce, and to create wealth for other people and serve other people. And that's how we provide for human flourishing. It is not through the actions of the federal government. And so we didn't stand up for the church, and we didn't stand up for each other very well at times. In my case in Missouri, where I live, it wasn't quite so bad. But I know, that in many cases, like, I mean, supposedly freedom loving Florida had some of the worst cases of this early on. And so, Governor Ron DeSantis should kind of take a pause there and consider his actions and maybe apologize a little. And the darling, of course, of the conservative movement, Donald Trump, was of course responsible for the first lockdowns and promoting that. They shouldn't forget that. And yet,
he even chastised Ron DeSantis for wanting to lift his lockdown too early.
But Ron DeSantis was also responsible for Florida checkpoints at the entry to Georgia. And one of my buddies at the 10th Amendment Center, Mike Meharry, the host of the Godarchy podcast, and who is we maintain his catalog at LCI. Mike is a great guy. He's involved with us. Like, he remembers trying to get across state lines and getting pulled over and stuff it was insane. And so there, as the church had an opportunity to make an impact, and I think that we missed it. And so we should take pause and both repent of that sin when it comes down to it, and endeavor to do better. Now, there were some people who did stand up for it. I mean, we at LCI tried to do so as well, and to encourage people to both understand what like, again, I saw a lot of COVID stuff. Understand like what is at stake, but also don't capitulate to restricting freedom. That is
Indeed.
not good. So interestingly enough, we actually have a publication that we are green lighting. It is on its way. We can announce that now. A book called A House Divided: The Church and COVID-19 that we're publishing. It's slated to come out on the 5th anniversary of 2 Weeks to Stop the Spread in the middle of March. Very excited to have that happen. It's going to be really cool. And again, that's by a guy named Benj Giffen, who's a bit of a newcomer to our organization, but we are very excited to be publishing that. And it will be kind of a work of public theology, rehashing a lot of what happened during the pandemic and the way the church responded, a proper theology of leadership based on the book of Ezekiel and other books of the Bible that will help us to understand better how to respond biblically and theologically to these insane scenarios that are presented to us by the federal government in cases of crisis. So crisis leadership is kind of what it's all about, and we need to understand how to do better in that.
And you can find that in the book section of libertarianchristians.com.
You will eventually. It is not.
Oh, okay.
It is not publicly available yet. Like I said,
Yeah.
it is in the final kind of editing stage. We're getting in. We're it's on the way. You can look forward to it.
So, what do you think about the concept or the idea that church-going people are very similar to gun-owning people, where they are rule followers as a group? Generally, they will bend over. They're the law-abiding firearm owners and the law-abiding churchgoers. So this kind of persona, do you think it when the government goes way outside of their boundaries, their constitutional boundaries, do you think that their first tendency is their worst tendency, and their first tendency is to obey the law and to do what they're told and all that? Do you think it's very similar in that sense?
You're probably onto something. I can't say I've ever heard that analogy made, but it does make sense. It is, generally speaking, people are, Christians can be agreeable in this respect. We want to, act peacefully and with people who are around us. And, that's kind of what we're called to do, is to live quiet lives, to not be a nuisance to people, not be even moral busybodies amongst our fellow men, but rather clean our own house, if you will. Or to use a Jordan Peterson phrase, make your own bed first, and so on and so on and so forth. The first instinct is probably going to be to kind of like, well, we're going to respect and maybe and potentially comply. But there are times where we need to understand what is at stake and stand up for what's right there. And that, I think, is, whereas our first instinct, if you recall, during 2 weeks to stop the spread, initially, like, people were kind of like, we don't know what's going on. We probably need to, take a step back for a second. Let's just take a few minutes and figure this out. But that didn't result in the end in something that was, net positive. And so while people might have been agreeable at first, we should have gotten more disagreeable with time.
Yeah, I think it's
2 weeks.
it's
2 weeks
the
to stop the spread became 2 years to lock us down and destroy our liberties.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, is to recognize when you see tyranny happening before your eyes, because pretty soon you're going to be loaded onto a boxcar heading to some showers that
It's like
you're not gonna walk out of.
It's like first they came for the drive-in church, and then they came
The drive-in
for my pastor.
pastors. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But I got to say, you mentioned that, maybe Christians didn't stand up enough, but it seemed like there were so many groups who didn't stand up enough. I mean, libertarians didn't really speak out loudly enough. I mean, there were certainly some libertarians. I mean, I was like, it's funny. We had a discussion on our sister show, the Libertarian Counterpoint, several weeks before this, back in February, I think, and of that year.
Last Thursday of February of 2020.
Yeah, and we were debating whether it was okay to quarantine a sick person, let alone, and then we found out later on, oh my God, they want to quarantine everybody. A sick person. But it's funny, it wasn't just libertarians, like Joe Jorgensen wasn't extraordinarily outspoken, it felt like, on the issue, but there were people on the secular side who fell down too, like the skeptic community. Oh my gosh, talk about the government lying constantly about what they were doing, and they swallowed everything. They were cheerleading it.
Sometimes these skeptics are not really like intellectually honest about what they're being skeptical of. Maybe they're just belligerent anti-religion people. Yeah. So and that is often the case. And and to my friend, my skeptic friends out there, I respect you very much, but you have colleagues who are not very respectable. You know, so,
Well, you know what's funny? I was talking with Leon about this the other day, but like you watch, I don't know if you know who James Randi is, but you know,
yeah, sure.
he used to debunk the science types,
Yeah.
all the time, saying, "Hey, look, you guys are swallowing a bunch of crap constantly without being skeptical." And look at the people who claim to adore James Randi. They all swallowed everything anybody in a white coat gave them.
Well, because
COVID.
in part because that's part and parcel to the religion.
Yeah.
Our society has kind of created a religion of science, and it is a false view even of science. Now, as I'm a professional scientist and engineer by trade. That is what I do. And I am appalled at times at even the way many scientists and engineers view their own work. And that we are not circumspect enough about even, the things that we do ourselves. I think that it was Richard Feynman, the famed, and renowned physicist, who said, like, the most important thing you need to do when you're doing science is to not be fooled. And the first part of that is to not fool yourself. And I'm totally butchering that quote. Somebody can put it in the chat and get it right. But
I think you're close enough. I think you're close enough.
Well, Richard Feynman also had a great quote. We used it a long time ago on the show, but he said, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned.
Yes,
and that's exactly what we were getting during COVID,
yeah.
is answers that
How
can't
dare
be questioned.
Yeah, how dare you, question this mask mandate or whatever, because that's the science. Like, how dare you question the science? So the science is kind of the religion now, and ironically enough, that is I would say one of the biggest problems that we have in the way in which government is even occurring these days, is that the appeal is like, you can't question it, because if the moment that you do is like, well, we have a study. Like, I'm sorry, really? Have you heard about the crisis of replication lately? Have you heard about, like, maybe there are things such as natural law that contradict what you're saying from an ethical standpoint? Like, this is not the way in which we are to behave.
Yeah, the one thing I would like to say, I mean, except I would have to call it the persecution of the church that went on during COVID. I think I think what you guys are saying are obviously are totally correct, and I think the persecution was quite intense upon the church. But I think we cannot leave unsaid that other sectors of society were probably just as much persecuted, if not more.
Oh yeah.
I would say small businesses, for instance. I mean, look at what they did. The big businesses were allowed to stay open, and the mom and pop, their lives were ruined. Some of them will never come back. Okay,
Absolutely.
so I mean, even though I accept all of the discussion about the church itself, I think that is something we should not leave unsaid.
I am so glad you said that, Leon, because that is so true. It was pure evil the way in which the feds decided that some people were essential workers.
Right.
You could like, I mean, I love me a good whiskey, but why is it appropriate to call the liquor store essential, but your church isn't, or the liquor store or the stripper, joint is essential, but the mom and pop hardware store isn't? And I mean, come on, like, are you serious?
Well, it was essential for Hunter Biden, okay?
Oh,
I don't know who else. That was really essential there.
Oh God, yeah, that's on it. You're right. Geez.
Well, one other area too that I think we've just so it doesn't seem like it's just one area, but there's other areas too where the Christians have had a lot of sort of encroachment by government, and I think Jane, maybe you could bring this up, but one of the visual here was the issue of pro-choice, pro-life issues, and certainly we've seen that just for what would be, I mean, we went through a whole course of actions in 2019 where essentially we were told that anything was okay with respect to demonstrating and protesting, but we were seeing people who were like the definition of peaceful protesting. If somehow there was a shoulder bump or something else, we were seeing SWAT teams called in on people, to come and arrest them in front of their families. There was this one case of this pro-life activist. I think his name is Mark Hook, I think. And he was, I believe, arrested in front of his family, I guess, by a SWAT SWAT team because, of being at, a demonstration again in front of an abortion clinic, I believe in. And there's been several other cases too, where, people who are relatively peaceful protesters, I mean, just stating what their beliefs are on this, being thrown in jail for significant amounts of time, it's just absolutely crazy. And, this kind of leads us towards the election issues. So I figured that'd be a good segue there. But do you have any thoughts on this particular issue too? Because it really seems totalitarian the way they're coming down on, people voicing their religious opinions on this.
I mean, you said it all right there. I mean, like we live in a mad society in some level in this. Like when it is considered to be mostly peaceful to, parade down a street, set things on fire and break windows of small businesses. Yeah. That's okay. That's mostly peaceful, but God forbid that you might call upon the name of God and offend somebody who wants to have an abortion, because that is worthy of getting, a couple years in prison over. Madness.
This situation is standing there with the sign and praying, and you're being thrown in jail. Lighting a town on fire is like, oh, don't worry, we'll let you out. We're not going to arrest anybody.
I am not always a fan of the phrase "the woke mind virus," but in my opinion, this is kind of where it is most evident. Is that when you see this level of dichotomy of the way in which, there is a double standard about what is appropriate in society like this, that is a mind virus and needs to be, purged with appropriate antibiotics, which in our case should be a better presentation of the gospel and a better presentation of our principles. This is not something that is merely going to be solved through political pressure and a change of a law, because clearly the people who are enacting and enforcing the laws are not on their side. And so instead, we have to understand that the culture around us, politics is downstream of that culture. And so we need to be like, this is where we as Christians and as Christian libertarians should understand that in order to save this problem or to solve this problem, we need to be saving souls. And that's where, we have to be. I hope that is clear, to my fellow believers out there. This is a call for us to get better at what we do, because we can only affect the circle of influence that we have around us. And until we recognize that and begin to actually work in that circle effectively, we will not make a bigger impact more broad.
And Jason, I will not characterize the pro-life position as something religious, even though a lot of the pro-life activists do incorporate prayer into their protests, but I would not characterize the position.
Sure. I think the Venn diagram is a very strong overlap.
It should.
We wouldn't get into weeds on that one, but let's agree to disagree right now.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. You're right. We should be able to tell from the natural law that this is an appropriate, way to understand the morality in today's day and age. I mean, that should not be, dismissed by any means. But it is also appropriate for us Christians, especially as we find other Christians. And I mean, if we posit, for instance, and believe, because still the predominant demographic of America, for instance, if we're just being Amerocentric here for a second, the bulk of our society still has some semblance of being Christian. And yet there are more abortions happening, or at least in the recent past have been happening every year. So many, in fact, that it's undeniable that Christians are participating in that too.
Sure.
And so we should be appealing to our Christian values too, because there's so many of us who need to hear it.
Yes.
So I mean, so let me affirm exactly what you're saying. Yes. There's also this other aspect too, that we have to speak to, clean our own house here.
Fair enough.
Right?
Fair enough.
As at a meta level for a second here, I'll just say this is part and parcel to the point of what LCI, Libertarian Christian Institute, is meant to be. We are calling the church to a better form of action, both ethically, in our immediate lives and publicly, the way we work politically with each other. That is what this is all about, because we are failing as a church and as a society. And if we want to make a bigger impact, then let's clean our house. Let's do better. If we believe that God uses the church to make a tremendous impact in the world today, Western civilization wouldn't exist without it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then we are called to fix that. Let's do it. And we can do that better. Like we can actually make a bigger effect here than in the federal government off the top. Politics is downstream of culture. Churches are our culture. We can change that much more quickly than we can the downstream side.
Norman, I did want to ask you, we're getting close to an hour, and I mean, I've got a lot more I'd love to talk with you about, but I know that you're on the other coast, so I don't want to, take too much of your time here if you don't have the time. So are you pressed for the next, you got 5 or 10 minutes, or you got a little bit longer?
I've certainly got time for you, buddy. I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Okay, super. Okay, no, because I did want to touch on some of the election stuff, and sure. I think that is crucial. And James, maybe you could play video KOL 1, because I think this is a big part of the reason, or maybe might give a good indication of where Christians might be for voting. So, James, can you play video KOL 1?
Year's election revolves around a woman's body.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I want to take a moment, and can we try to think of any law that gives the government the power to make a decision?
I know what you're going to ask.
About a man's body. Let's
No.
Is there any law?
No. It's no.
Well, I can't think of something that's, I guess, more black and white as far as, who Christians would probably vote for. I mean, would Christians see that video and just want to vote for whoever is on the other side of that candidate? Or is that something, where it's just simply, we're talking about laws that are only made that impact women, and clearly they're talking about abortion, but I mean, to just not even acknowledge the fact that men are dragged off to war.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, oh, really? Make a decision about a man's body? Oh, really? Yeah. Are you sure about that? Yeah. But as libertarians, we oppose that too. So, okay. I mean, they have no ground and no standing to use with that. Like, who are they to talk? Yeah.
But this thing though gets back to this whole argument of bodily autonomy, and about the woman has bodily autonomy and she's free to do what she pleases with her body. But the fact of the matter is that is not acknowledged here. There are two bodies in question here. Now, I agree with the body autonomy argument. I really do. But I think that thing that is growing inside the woman also has bodily autonomy. So if you're going to believe in this bodily autonomy, believe in bodily autonomy for both.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that should be evident, and we should be able to, have some nuanced discussion about it. Like, we don't have to be, there are such things as double jeopardy situations and so on. Those are extremely rare. So it's not like we need to worry that much about it. We should have an understanding. And if we really need to, develop technology to get around this, okay, fine, we could probably do that too. But it is not the case that your principle of bodily autonomy means that you get to kill a baby. I'm sorry, like that's inappropriate. And we can have some measure of nuanced discussion about it, but not that much. Like it should not be that unclear at this point.
Yeah, I think the big. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I wonder if they make a distinction between whether or not it's a male baby that gets aborted or a female baby that gets aborted. There might be one example.
Certainly, some lefties do. Lefties in China.
Well, and these people are
that has not served them well, and now they are regretting that.
Yeah, and these people are inconsistent, all over the place on this topic, right? I mean, there's a great clip. I don't listen to Tim Pool that often or anything like that. I saw this clip of him arguing with a guy and noting, like, that this pro-choice advocate who say, and Tim asked him, well, what if is it okay if the mom wants to go, do methamphetamine or something like that? I was like, oh, well, sure, bodily autonomy. He's like, but it's going to affect. Oh, well, if it affected the baby, that wouldn't be. But what does that matter? And the notion being that like this guy could not justify that it was his position that it was not okay for a pregnant woman to, go on drugs that would affect a baby, but it was totally fine at any point, of great health of the woman otherwise to just like, and to end that baby's life, period. Like they can't justify themselves in this, not in the end. So they have to, couch it in vague terms. They have to try to redefine things and make things as vague as possible and as ill-defined as possible so as to get what they want, which is to be able to kill a baby for their own personal benefit.
We'll talk about not being able to justify their positions. Now remember what this thing is being called: reproductive rights. They're killing the child, but it's called reproductive rights.
They're always changing.
And if you don't allow it, you're denying health care now.
Yes.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Yeah. But one thing,
that's a more recent one, like, and we like, another good one you'll see is that this is not health equity anymore. It's like, watch out for those buzzwords, and all y'all out there, watch out for health equity. That's going to be the next thing.
But one thing I would push back just a little bit, and I know me and Leon have had this argument a lot of times, but is the argument, especially after what we saw happening in COVID and the justifications that government will use to get into your life over health. It does worry me a little bit about the government policing pregnancies, being involved in the decisions that you make as a household. I mean, obviously that's the most extreme decision, having an abortion. But on the other hand, oh my gosh, you're not eating the right amount of protein. You're drinking raw milk. I mean, we've literally seen government agents show up with guns drawn over raw milk, right? So it does worry me a little bit, the idea that the encroachment into the family, the idea that you would suddenly have this potentially pregnancy police that might pop out. But I don't know.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, Jason, but I think it doesn't quite follow, and I think you'll readily agree with this too. Like, it doesn't really follow that because the government shouldn't tell you what you can eat and drink and do what so on, in order, if you're pregnant, that then the corollary to that is that you have the right to kill an unborn child. Like, it doesn't really follow, right? And so,
I'm not using that as a justification. I'm only using that as a potential consequence of I mean, we might be unleashing a bigger beast.
But it also,
into the world.
Well, but also it is incumbent on us then to say that just because we say you cannot kill an unborn child like this, that does not mean that anybody has the right to do this on the other side. So like, it's they are different categories, and we can make that argument clear.
Okay.
Norman, if we had 2 hours, Jason, I could go wrong on this go around and around.
We promise we won't.
Well, and at LCI we have
sign off.
At LCI we have one person in particular who's done a lot of extra work, more than I have, on the topic. Her name is Carrie Baldwin. You can find her at libertarianchristians.com. Has written a lot of articles for us. She also has stuff at mereliberty.com, and has written. She is the gal that wrote the chapter on abortion that's in our book here called Faith Seeking Freedom. It's my green screen is coming out that one. So, but she wrote that chapter and is and though it has a bit of datedness to it since we published it before the repeal of Roe and Dobbs. The principles are still sound in it, and we're even expanding upon that for a future edition. And we have plenty of material there. I think all of this stuff, and like we should be against, the kind of like pronatal policy, pronatalist policy is kind of another up and coming thing, especially amongst. You could even call it you could even sometimes call it the woke right. So watch out for that. That's another thing. It's on the horizon. You can find articles about this, of course, and we're against that too, because that's government intrusion into private life in a way that is inappropriate. And so we'll be addressing that at LCI in the coming months and years, I'm sure, as that becomes more and more of an issue.
Indeed.
Okay. Well, one of the areas I wanted to get into on this election result. So obviously Trump won the election, and for a lot of people, it may not have been the two greatest choices out there, but I do feel like one of the things that we saw of maybe why Kamala lost is because the dishonesty was just so outrageous. I mean, we saw essentially the media and pollsters. I want to use the term, I guess, to fit into the religious context of what we're talking about, maybe, but bearing false witness constantly. In fact, I have a video clip that just exemplifies this, and we used it a few times on the show, but I can't get around this one because it's just so outrageous, and it's what led to all this. But James, can you play KOL 2, where Morning Joe says, as Biden is deteriorating in front of us, it's the best Biden ever. Can you play KOL 2?
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever. Not a close second. And I've known him for years. The Brzezinskis have known him for 50 years. If it weren't the truth, I wouldn't say it.
Oh my God. He's practically pointing to a zombie and saying it's the best Biden ever.
Well, thank God. Thank God that's the best Biden ever. That's just it. Thank God it's the best Biden. I would not have liked to see the worst Biden. Okay? Thank God.
Oh, that one was in the 90s. That was the one, the drug warrior Biden, and so on. Yeah, that was the worst Biden.
But I think, and James, maybe you could bring up the visual here, but we've seen over and over again just essentially gaslighting by the media. I mean, so here was an article by Newsweek that saying who got it wrong, who got it right, and every poll they talk about essentially was calling it for Kamala. I mean, most of them were saying it was close, but they were pretty much all saying that it was Kamala was going to win, and yet they were wrong in a big way. I mean, here's the actual results for people who, in case you've been living in a cave, 312 to 226 electorals, but even the popular vote went to Trump by about 1% or so. So, several million votes, which is nobody predicted that, which everybody was saying that this, at least all of the people in the MSM Pravda and the pollsters were all saying that this is going to be, at the very least, Kamala is going to win the popular vote, but maybe by some, I guess, just old ridiculous rules, they might say, of our electoral college that, Trump will win by a trick or something, but, it wasn't even close. So, it just seemed like, this was very much something of I guess maybe a morality issue. I mean, these people lying over and over again, and we're actually starting to see some of them pay for it. CNN now is, I guess, going through with a machete and cutting their staff, and MSM is MSNBC is apparently, I think, also on the auction block now.
Yeah, they say Jeff Bezos should buy it and fix it.
Wow.
But seriously though, I think there's several phenomena ongoing here.
Yeah.
But the biggest phenomena, I think, is the success of the left in silencing people. I have a little simple example I can show you. I have a MAGA hat, okay? I have a MAGA hat, but I would not wear it outside this house. Okay? In America, right? In America, in the United States of America, I would not wear my MAGA hat outside of the house. The point being, the left, with their cancer culture and all their nonsense about misinformation and disinformation, they have been able to silence us. So there are a lot of people out there who are Trump supporters who will not speak to a pollster. I kid you not. I knew several people who were voting for Donald Trump and would not have told anybody that.
Yeah.
You will not speak to pollsters. I was called several times, I'm sure, and I'm sure there were pollsters calling me, and I refused to speak to them. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are doing the same thing. So when election night came around and Donald Trump won, everybody's surprised. 2-3 points. Oh my God, how did this happen? But the worst case of that thing that you're talking about, Jason, On the weekend before the election, a woman named Ann Seltzer or something like that, a very respected pollster, by the way, supposedly, very respected, good reputation. She put out a poll out of Iowa, of all places, saying that Kamala is 3 points ahead of Donald Trump. Trump ended up winning that state by 14 points. How could this pollster be so wrong other than manipulating the sample that she had? How could it be?
Well, you know,
I'll tell you, they just lie. They don't they don't get representative data, and they just lie. They make stuff up. I like, this is the political consultancy machine. There is a crap ton of money in it. You know it's true. I mean, this is how they end up $20 million in debt after raising $1 billion.
Tell me this.
So on, you know, and I mean, and frankly, it's not supremely different in the Republican side, as I understand it. I mean, there are some indicators that might suggest that that you know, Trump kind of kicked a bunch of people out. I mean, there's varying anecdotes about how there's certain folks in the consultancy machine over there who are so jealous of the $1 million they make every cycle on ad spends and whatnot that they don't care about any results. They'll just make stuff up in order to get what they want. And like, just why? This is what they do.
Well, speaking of making stuff up, and this is, I guess, it really goes to the heart of it, and beyond just the news and the polls here. But I mean, this was the Democrat Party's pitch to their own voters, and I wanted to show this one video here too, really quick, because it shows, I guess, that the way they want their own voters to interact with their families. So this is KOL 4. It's Kamala telling voters it's cool to be dishonest with your own families about what you're doing. So, James, can you play KOL 4?
Your turn, honey.
In the one place in America where women still have a right to choose, you can vote any way you want. And no one will ever know.
Did you make the right choice?
Sure did, honey.
Remember, what happens in the booth stays in the booth. Vote Harris Walls.
So, I mean, just as a libertarian, there's nothing wrong with people in a family who don't agree on what they want to vote on. But the idea that you have to lie to your partners about that's like a Democrat message going on here. Yes. So I don't know what. Yeah, I'm curious what you think about this, Norman, because I mean, clearly this seems to fly in the face of a group called the Libertarian Christian Institute.
Well, you know, in our view, like keep in mind, we're a 501c3. So our official position is that we're already against the next president. Okay. So that's it. That's how we roll. Because we're against power to begin with, like that. And you know, fundamentally, like if our vote is ultimately going toward the progression of aggressive action against others, then we think there's a problem there. And so there's reasons why we can consider voting, you know, perhaps an act of self-defense, or, you know, there's varying arguments about those sorts of things. That's fine. But let's not kid ourselves either. And certainly, you know, we should understand, like, how to be honest in all of these things together. And let's talk more openly. You know, it doesn't make any sense to me, other than just like as a joke ad. Maybe it makes a little bit of sense, but like just the absolute tone deafness of that ad, if it's trying to be serious, is ridiculous. Like, that makes more sense as an SNL sketch than it does as a political ad. So, you know, come on. Come on, Kamala, you can do better. Like, it's ridiculous.
But getting back to our Christian teachings here.
Yep.
One of the commandments tell us, don't bear false witness.
Yep.
And there the ad, I mean, if it was a joke, fine, we could say it's a joke, we can all laugh if it was a joke. But if this was an ad, it was not a joke, I think. So, and they are encouraging people to do the very same thing that we all are against, which is we don't want people to be a false witness.
Yep, as absolute. It just seems crazy to me. Like, you know, and like let's be frank. It's not as if like that Trump is some paragon of virtue who always tells the truth. I think like Dave Chappelle hit it on the head when he calls him an honest liar. Which I think is hilarious when you, like, in its context and everything. But like, I mean, the man will say anything, and you know, pretty much. And I mean, just look at his appointments. I mean, like, are you seriously thinking that this guy's going to be like a major boon for liberty? Oh, you got to be stretching it now. I mean, there's some hope for certain things, but like, come on, I can't really believe it until like, show me the money is sort of the mantra there. Like, show me, and I'm in the show me state, so Missouri's taught me well, I suppose. So
I wouldn't defend Donald Trump here or anytime, but I think there is some overlap with liberty in some of the things, underlying some of the things that he's attempting to do. One of them being trying to cut down the size of government, which I think is a wonderful thing.
Well, the first thing he can do if he actually like wants to send a resounding ring of confidence that he's going to do something, then he needs to like free Ross Ulbricht on day 1 or day 2. Like, that needs to happen. He said it last time. He didn't do it. And the man has rotted in jail for 4 more years because of his inactivity. So, he owes it. And if he doesn't do it, something is up, and like, just give up at that point. Cause that's that. But like, maybe if he does that, I'll start maybe thinking maybe it's positive.
Ulbricht, Snowden, and even Julian Assange. Julian Assange wasn't given a complete pass by Biden. He was just sort of let off the criminal hook on it. But he needs to be Julian Assange needs to be given an apology.
Yeah. Like, first things first. Like, let's get Ross needs to be free. That's period.
Yeah. So. Well, we're just about at the end of our show, and this is where we usually like to do something funny. Although some of the stuff we've been showing is a little bit funny. Funny. How crazy it is. But we usually like to show something that's a little bit outrageous somebody has said, and this also goes to the election, and it goes to I guess the interpretation of the results by the left on this. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm a libertarian, so I'm not thrilled with everything Donald Trump stands for, but it's like the left is sort of clown world insane, and I think we're going to see this in this next clip. So James, can you bring up the visual real quick? So on MSNBC, they were giving sort of an election analysis on the night of the voting, and so we have a video clip that shows Joy Reid's take of how Kamala ran her campaign, and we've already shown a few video clips of how crazy things were that she was doing on her campaign. But James, maybe you could show KNP1.
I mean, this really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. She had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swift, the Swifties. She had the Beehive. Like, you could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time. And
So apparently, getting the celebrities on board is how you run a campaign. And what we actually saw during that period of time was that she gave almost no interviews. And when she did give interviews, they were to mostly friendly sources. She dodged Joe Rogan, who wanted to have a nice 3-hour sit down with her. And instead, she went and did that, what was it, Your Daddy podcast or whatever, the one we showed earlier, where she just laughed. Call her daddy. Yeah. So, I mean,
what was that? I mean, that was insane. I don't understand this at all.
But this is one of the things that kills me about this whole thing is there's an actual serious issue here. The left loves to talk about campaign finance reform. And when you're literally going out there, you have a chance for free media to go out there on people like Joe Rogan and a ton of other alternate podcasts. I mean, I'll bet the Libertarian Christian Institute would have given them an interview.
That would have been interesting. We probably would have done it. We did have Chase Oliver at one point, but again, if we don't endorse, that's the key.
But the point of this is, though, they spent $1 billion, and Jane, maybe you could bring up the visual because I do have a few links here to show. But essentially, they ran through $1 billion. They apparently spent over $20 million on celebrity endorsements. Harpo Productions got $1 million from the Kamala campaign, and that was certainly one of the issues that came up. But it was just absolutely nuts. The amount of endorsements that she was literally paying for, and then apparently they're in debt too.
$20 million in debt. Yes. 20 million.
Yeah,
Yes.
which it just blows my mind that if you look at the way things were done on the other side, and with libertarians as well who were running, people like RFK Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy, even Trump himself, they were willing to go on just all kinds of different sources and have long form discussions with people where it wasn't scripted. And Kamala literally, wasn't up for that. In fact, I guess Joe Rogan's team even said that, that they offered her, but Kamala was saying, no, it has to be 1 hour and we have to have editing approval and everything else. So just, stuff that was absolutely nuts. But if you wanted to reduce the amount of money in politics, what better way to do it than having candidates who are brave enough to go out and just talk? Right. I mean, anyways, I'm just curious what you guys think of all this.
Well, remember what Joy Reid said. This is what a flawless campaign looks like. Okay? You burn through $1 billion, $1 billion in 3 months. You end up $20 million in debt. You don't win a single battleground state. And this is what you call a flawless campaign. I am glad it was flawless. Because
well, she got Queen Latifah. Remember, that's the standard.
Yeah, I think that there's so many net positives, at least from a kind of meta point of view, about the way in which this ended up. The biggest one being that I think the stranglehold of the mainstream media is coming to an end. And as is evident, as you noted, from the cuts that are happening, the viewerships that are plummeting, and the fact that you can basically run a campaign on podcasts and win, because that's how they did it. And the fact that the Democrats thought that they could appeal to voters in this very strange way of like, well, then we just need more celebrity endorsements. That as long as Queen Latifah or I didn't know. I wasn't paying that close attention, but I had not heard until very recently about like the Oprah Winfrey show, where what a bizarrely staged event.
Yes.
Where this is how they felt that they were going to get the victory, but it obviously was not evident that it worked. It clearly did not. And in fact, I think that the one other like astounding result, again, this kind of speaks to the bankruptness of the mainstream media, is that you just look at the vote totals themselves after 2020, where in a pandemic you had the absolute biggest turnout of voters in the history of man, and to where the Biden Harris ticket got 80 plus million votes.
81.
80, like it was 81 in the end.
Yes, it was 81 million. Yes.
Okay, so 80. Yeah, okay, 81 million, and then but look at what happened. How is it that they basically lost what amounts to because Trump's total did not increase that substantially from 2020.
Right.
Maybe only a couple million. But
Yeah,
the Democrats lost something like 16 million votes. So you have one of two conclusions to make. I was not one of the I didn't really have a dog in the fight about it, the steal the election or something like that in 2020. I didn't really care because I was not again, I'm already against the next president. I'm that kind of, ANCAP and so on. The fact is though, is that the Democrats have a point to be reckoned with. Either they lost 20% of their constituency to what? We have no idea. Did they all just die? Or they certainly didn't move over to Trump because
they were dead already. They were dead already.
Well, so they eat one of two things is true. They either didn't come out and vote, and so all of their flawless campaigning was for naught and didn't make a difference, and nothing they did mattered there, or you have to come to the conclusion that maybe there was funny business in 2020. I didn't think I was going to be saying that at the end of on Wednesday of last week.
Yeah, but the numbers.
When I look at the numbers, and I'm like, I don't
know.
know how you like. I'm not saying this is what happened, but you have to come to a conclusion there. Now, maybe there's an alternative explanation. Maybe it's more complex than that, and there could be tremendous amount of nuance. And well, if you retally in a certain way, and you can figure this out, and it actually does amount to 15 million lost votes. Okay. Maybe that's it, but it doesn't make sense as it stands right now. And so, like, how are you to make of that?
Yeah.
To me, like, that's the question on my mind for like the next couple of months. I have yet to have it explained. I don't know if it will. There's going to be apologies being made, apologetics, if you will, for whatever happened. And they're already doing so. That's why they use the rhetoric of things like, oh, she ran a flawless campaign. She got all the celebrity endorsements. Oh, it was so amazing. It was historic. At least she said it was an historic occasion. Like, she at least got that right. And you use the proper article there. But still, like, how are you to come with any other conclusion than there was something weird here, and
something doesn't smell right. Something does not smell right.
Especially when it's the group that literally says we don't need to see voter IDs and we want to hand out, we want to mail multiple ballots out to you wherever you live or have lived in the past or will live in the future. We're going to send ballots.
Yeah. So
Tim was going to say something. Tim, go ahead.
Oh, is he locked?
Yep, I think he's
might have
been
lost
stoic on us. So, yeah.
Well, suffice to say, like, I think that there's so many interesting observations out of this, and you can be, a libertarian with a straight head on our shoulders and be able to call a spade, to call Trump an honest liar, to hold him to account to what he said he was going to do and things like that. And have some sort of minor optimism that maybe there could be a net positive out of it, while also recognizing that there's any number of ways in which this could go completely negative, and just being circumspect about it all. Because I mean, certainly the net positive of the MSM going down in flames is something that is just glorious to behold, because it's just they're disgusting and stupid, and it's become more and more evident. There's things to lament, and there's things that are not net positives, period, about the whole thing. But let's chin up, foot forward. We can only affect what we can affect, and let's keep moving. We have to do it.
Yeah. The biggest gain of Trump may have been the death of Pravda. That may ultimately be his biggest contribution. But he is also talking about killing the Department of Education. So we have a lot of other good things to hope for.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. The man is not a saint. He's not a pope. But even the Pope is not a saint either.
On one day he's talking about eliminating the Department of Education, and on the next he's saying he's going to appoint Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. I mean, come on, really? Are you kidding me? Come on. So
I'll take that trade though. Department of Education.
If it happens, I mean, maybe like Gaetz is a scuzz bucket. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. But
Norman, to be honest, if Trump could do half of the things in terms of limiting and cutting down the size of government, if he could achieve, and cutting the budget, if he could achieve those things, I will take the Matt Gaetz appointment as Attorney General. Seriously.
In the end. But see, like, the question is, what are your signs pointing? And like, I'm not convinced that the signs are ultimately pointing in the right direction. This is why I need, in order to become, if I were to become confident about net positives that could occur, we need to see certain things like Ross Ulbricht being freed. If that doesn't happen quickly, then just like no holds barred, go after it. We have to, pressure at that point because
well, I think the worst sign is the appointment of Mark Rubio to to Secretary of State, because it definitely feels very neoconish to have him in there. But on the other hand, they were talking about maybe Thomas Massey for the Department of Agriculture or something. So I mean, and they're talking about malaying the USDA. Get them malaying the USDA. So and that could be a really interesting thing if we had a libertarian put up to a cabinet position, somebody like that. So it might really do wonders for us in the future. But
well, he said he was going to appoint a libertarian when he came to the convention.
Yeah. But we shall see.
We shall see.
But
that's kind of a we shall see. Like let's so far there's only been like one appointment that I thought was that was remotely okay. So,
who's that? Who's that?
Stephanie Lips.
Lips?
Or
who's
the chief of staff,
No, Susie Wills.
That's right. I'm sorry. Yeah. So, she's all right. But for a variety of reasons that I don't need to get into. Like that's a bit of a deep cut. So,
well, I guess at this point we'll have to have faith in the Trump administration, which brings us back to the whole intro for the show and the Libertarian Christian Institute. So, James, can you bring up Norman's webpage again, and we'll let Norman kind of call the show out on what he wants to leave everybody with.
Wow. Well, thank you for putting this up. I mean, I appreciate that. We have just recently announced that. We are a 501c3, of course, and here's the background. Like, so we run on the generosity of our donors, and we think of every one of our donors as helping us to amplify a voice of liberty for the kingdom of God, and that's what we're doing here. So, we have got a wonderful opportunity here. The LCI board has put together a challenge grant for our supporters, where we are matching every dollar donated up to the next $15,000 from now until the end of 2024. We're already 7% of that goal, and we've only been up for just a couple days now. And we know that, of course, that this is the biggest time of the year that people are thinking and considering about their charitable giving. With things like Giving Tuesday coming up, and of course the season of charity that is Christmas, of course, and just the end of the year. Even thinking about tax deductibility and things like that, we donate to us. It is a tax deductible donation. So we really appreciate that. If you want to participate and help us to do that, we have got so many cool things that are operating right now. We told you about our book about that's going to come out about COVID. We've got 2 more books that are going to be coming out. We haven't even announced yet in 2025. And I'm not going to get into the specifics about that, but they are very exciting. There's some really cool stuff there. And one other thing, and take your mouse, if you will, and you see that little button at the top left-hand corner that says EN. You don't need to click through all of that if you want, but you'll note here that we now have been working on a solution for bringing all of our content into non-English languages. And this has been a desire for a lot of different people. We have a tremendous amount of demand for Spanish language materials, and we have not been able to meet that. But we are trying, and we're stepping out in faith right now that we are going to be able to do this using newfound technologies, as well as supporters who are interested in proofreading and hopefully providing some resources in order to make this happen. I'm telling you, this is absolutely crucial. LCI, the website, is already read in, I kid you not, over 100 countries. We have that on on the matter of record. Over 100 countries reads our material on a yearly basis. And we have felt for some time that if we could ever figure out how to provide foreign language materials, non-English materials, it would be tremendous for that. And the early evidence just with this little tool that we put together, as bad as it is generating a tremendous amount of interest. And this is very exciting because, just like we've been talking a lot about American politics here. Let us not neglect that there are our brothers and sisters in Christ who are in desperate need of materials like this all across the globe. The number 1 language that is being requested right now is Spanish. The number 2 language, incidentally, is French. The early indicators. And one of the top 5 countries that are requesting translations, I kid you not, is Iran. And I mean, this is absolutely mind blowing. And so we have brothers and sisters across the world who are desperate for materials that they can learn from. And we have so much to offer. We have thousands of articles and hundreds of podcasts. And the more that we can kind of validate that this works and people want to see it come out there, this is what your money is going to, guys. Helps to make this happen. And so if you want to spread liberty across the world, it's projects like this that are going to do it. I'm just saying, like this, we're stepping out in faith to try and fix this. We know this is an issue, just like Bible translation. I mean, obviously Bible translation is way more important than us. So, get that out there, support that too. But this is a way in which that we can support our fellow believers all across the world. It is absolutely mind-blowing. Like, I could not possibly have anticipated the result here. We thought we were just doing this and we're going to see some Spanish, requests and whatnot. The fact that we're seeing this much is insane, and we love it. We're trying to help. We hope that you'll support it. There's so much more to do, and we have so much to offer. And we're going to keep on going with your help. And every time that somebody gives, that is like amplifying your voice to spread liberty throughout the world. And it really is getting spread throughout the world. You want to send an article to communist China? We're doing it, guys. We haven't been banned yet. So we may be one of your only vehicles into communist China.
Well, maybe religion will be the spark that lights Lady Liberty's torch, to spread that message around the world. So,
well, where there's a verse that says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. That's something that's very real. And first and foremost, it is a personal liberty. One where we are able to free our own minds from the constraints and the tyrannies that surround us. And that freedom, of that mental freedom, the ability to enter into the kingdom of God is the first step. That's the most important thing. And so, if you are not part of that, then I encourage you to look into that. I mean, that's super, super important. The next step of that is like what you can be both free your mind and renew your mind, and then have bodily freedom too, political freedom. All of that stuff matters too. And but our adherence to the principles of Scripture are first and foremost. We encourage you to check that out. Come to libertarianchristians.com and learn.
Well, thanks so much, Norman, for joining us today. And if you're out there watching, until the next show, think about what you can do in your community. I mean, here's somebody who's trying to push liberty through Christ, and we've had other people who are pushing liberty in other directions as well. And I tell you, it's a full court press. I mean, I feel like we may have gotten a little bit of a reprieve after this last election, maybe, but but I tell you, clearly there's a lot of people out there who are coming for your liberty. So if you want to, if you want to keep that liberty, you got to do something. Stand up for it, figure out how you can spread the message in your community. So until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.